I have spent months researching the camera market of Panasonic and its competitors. Today I will help you decide whether you should switch from the S5 IIX to the Nikon Z6 III, or if you should wait for the S1H Mark II. You will learn about sensor manufacturing, upcoming cameras and RAW formats. Let me show you my findings. The best camera for you is the one that maximizes your profit and productivity. Everyone has unique needs, so there is no best camera for everyone. All I say is speculative. Sources are linked in the description. If I got something wrong, please help everyone understand by posting a comment. The S5 IIX and S5 II are great cameras. You're likely waiting for the S1H2, but Panasonic recently released the S9, which is not so focused on professional videography. After the S5 IIX, Panasonic released the GH9 II and the GH7, which are Micro Four Thirds cameras. The GH7 provides internal ProRes RAW, 32-bit audio capabilities, ARRI-Log-C as a joke, and dual analog gain, which is, by the way, awesome, offering some hope for Panasonic users. However, the S5 II, S5 IIX, the S5 and the S9 all use the same Sony IMX410 sensor, also used in the Sony A7 III from 2018. Despite this, S5 IIX offers great value for its dynamic range and improved autofocus. It supports OpenGate and ProRes HQ recording to an SSD, which even the A7S III cannot do. You will learn later more about these features. Panasonic used to develop its own sensors, but now outsources semiconductor production to Nuvoton. They had a joint venture with Tower Semiconductor, Tower Jazz. It's called something like that. It seems Panasonic develops its own Micro Four Thirds sensors with Nuvoton, possibly with a design support from Tower Jazz. Also, they might have reused the GH9 II sensor in the GH7. However, their S-series sensor, the IMX410, is produced by Sony. Panasonic sees some growth in its mirrorless camera segment. Leica sensors are produced by Simosys, part of ASM Osram. The Leica SL and the SL2 sensors are not from Sony. The SL2 uses a 48 megapixel sensor, the CMB 50000 from Simosys. The SL3's 60 megapixel sensor is similar to Sony's IMX455 AQK, but it is produced by Simosys. Leica and Sony always try to beat each other within photography. Canon produces its own sensors and plans to introduce more mirrorless cameras. The R6 Mark II and R8 can record oversampled 6K and 4K 60p full frame. The R8 lacks IBIS and costs only around $1,300. Canon also released the C400, competing with the Sony FX6 with internal NDs. The hybrid camera market is so profitable for them. So Canon also has a patent for active cooling, which we might see in the next R5 Mark II. Nikon focuses on mid-high-end cameras and interchangeable lenses for mirrorless cameras. The Z8 and Z9 feature advanced fully stacked CMOS sensors with 45 megapixels, likely produced by Sony Semiconductor Solutions, probably the Sony IMX609 AQJ. The Z9 was released in October 2021, and in January 2021 the Sony A1 that has also a fully stacked sensor, the Sony IMX610, was released with 50 megapixels instead of 45. It is possible that Sony benefits from Nikon's sensor design, and Sony will always release a camera with a better sensor than Nikon. The Z6 uses a partially stacked sensor, and I believe it is designed by Nikon and fabricated by Sony. In a fully stacked sensor, pixels, RAM and circuitry are integrated into the sensor itself. In a partially stacked sensor, only the pixels and the RAM are together, similar to how DDR memory in a PC connects to the CPU via fast pipelines. I assume for the Z6 sensor, there's a fast connection from the sensor's RAM behind the pixels to the processing unit somewhere located in the camera. This separation allows the processing unit to be cheaper, slightly larger parts that can also handle more heat, and that addresses challenges of cooling and size constraints. Sony expects decelerated growth in the interchangeable lens and mirrorless camera market in the second half of 2024, possibly planning major releases for 2025. There is no matching Sony sensor listed for the Z6 III, but future models like the A7S4 or FX Mark III may have better specs. Fujifilm manufactures medium format cameras using Sony's IMX461 BQR sensor. You are likely not interested in a 100 megapixel photography camera. Panasonic and Fujifilm use Sony's sensor without modifications, But Panasonic develops its own Micro Four Thirds sensor. Leica uses CMOSIS, Canon develops its own sensors, and Nikon designs sensors which are then produced by Sony. Canon holds 46.5% of the camera market, Sony 26%, Nikon around 12%, Fujifilm around 6%, and Panasonic 4%. Panasonic's low market share impacts its ability to innovate. Like Fujifilm, they probably need to rely on unmodified sensor from Sony to be profitable. Panasonic might struggle to reuse old Sony sensors for the next video-centric full-frame camera. They might develop a new sensor with Tower Jazz or Nuvoton. Using the Nikon Z6 III sensor might seem unlikely due to Nikon's current market focus. It's not clear if Panasonic could get the A7S III sensor, the IMX510. Maybe once the A7S IV or FX3 Mark II is released, it could be possible. This sensor uses quad pixel binning to reduce noise. It could be that 2 of the pixels work with high ISO while the other 2 use low ISO. And once all 4 pixels are combined, this results in higher dynamic range. If Panasonic could modify the sensor, they could achieve 8K with 420 chroma. Especially if they could implement dual analog gain, it would be incredible, like they have for example in the GH7. Every quarter you will see rumors about the successor of the S1H. At one point they will be right, but do not get too excited. There is no statement, not even a hint from Panasonic that they will continue their full-frame cinema line. Of course, I hope they will continue it. I believe you will have better camera options from other brands in 2025. And I'm curious how Panasonic plans to hold its current cinema camera users then. The Nikon Z6 III offers internal RAW recording up to 6K 60p. Nikon's acquisition of RED for 85 million in April 2024 and its internal RED RAW recording patent allows them to offer this feature. In 2028, RED's patent ends, and then we definitely will have the S1H Mark II with internal RAW recording. The GH7 also supports internal RAW recording via Apple ProRes RAW, possibly due to a licensing deal with Nikon. Because of this costly deal, Nikon might need some cash, so it could be that they will sell their RAW license to other brands like Sony and Panasonic. This means the next FX3 Mark II could make use of the XOCN RAW format. Panasonic might face challenges securing sensors and RAW licenses from Sony and Nikon. They could reuse the S1H sensor, add face detect, a CF Express slot, 32-bit audio and internal RAW recording, but it would not compete directly with the Z6 III due to the 4K 60p crop. Since this would be no threat to Nikon, it could be an option. Alternatively, Panasonic could offer internal RAW recording via SSD for the S5-X through a software update, paying license fees to Apple and Nikon if the processor is powerful enough. Panasonic has registered patents for internal VNDs and box-shaped camera designs. So we could see our S5-X sensor with OLPF and internal VND in box shape. With this, Panasonic could compete with the FX6, but only if they add an improved sensor. You can create your own kind of S1HX just by adding an OLPF for $700 from Kolari Vision. This will totally eliminate moire, and you will never have to worry about rainbow effects when you film weddings, interviews, or other repeating patterns like skyscraper windows. Of course, rainbows are great if there is one. Regarding the internal VND, you can watch my tutorial where I show you how to build your own motorized external VND for low cost that you can even control via the DJI RS3 focus wheel. Let's talk about the problems of the S5-X. The missing OLPF can cause moire in certain scenarios. Consider modifying your S5-X with the Kolari OLPF to mitigate this. They can ship worldwide with insurance. Rolling shutter issues can be managed by avoiding rapid camera movements or shooting at higher frame rates, or tilting your camera by 90 degrees. If you frequently shoot fast-moving subjects like sports, racing, consider the A7S III or the Nikon Z6 III. This camera is the wrong one for you. And you can watch some of the videos by Daniel Schiffer to learn how to use whip pans. The 4K 60p crop turns your camera into an APS-C camera, potentially causing noise in low-light situations, and wasting money on full-frame lenses. You will have to get more distance, which is then reducing your background blur. So if you film 20% at 4K 60p, you're not using fully your potential for your full-frame lenses. The GH7 might be a better option for frequent 4K 60p shooting. That's why I would consider this aspect when comparing Lumix lenses with other brands who can shoot 4K 60p in full frame. The Nikon Z6 III is tempting, but consider several aspects. The Z6 III dynamic range is comparable to the S5 IIX if noise reduction is used, as you can see in Jared Undun's video. On the S5 IIX you can record in ProRes HQ 1.6 gigabit and even 1.9 gigabit at 60p to an SSD and get fine noise that you can remove in post. Will this give you even more dynamic range? The Nikon Z6 III has 8 stops of IBIS stabilization. The S5 II has 6.5 stops of IBIS stabilization. You can improve the stabilization with E-stabilization high, which transforms your full-frame video camera to an APS-C camera. Not the best option. Watch the video down there where I compare it. With the latest software update, the autofocus of the S5 IIX is fantastic and has no issues when filming events with multiple people. The Nikon Z6 III also has great autofocus with a 3D tracking system, which makes sense since it's a wildlife camera. Then the S5 IIX has no recording limit and can run through a whole day if your battery and your storage can provide it. Panasonic creates old boring TV cameras and it's their specialty to create reliable cameras. The Z6 III has no recording limit for NRAW, but it is not clear if it will overheat. Then a low pass filter in OLPF is very important to avoid moire. Some sources claim that the Nikon Z6 III has an OLPF. If this is true, this would be a game changer. All in all, wait for the test to verify dynamic range, stabilization, autofocus, OLPF and overheating issues. Let's look at the investment of switching your camera brand. We start with a basic setup that you have as a videographer. I will use here the potential resale value minus 10% since people always want to negotiate. So we have the cage for $100, the S5 IIX for $1,800, 3 lenses from $300 to $600 and the S Pro for $1,000. So this is a total of $4,300. If we take out the zoom lens, we are at $3,300. The Z6 III might have less dynamic range than the S5 IIX, but it shoots in 6K 60p full-frame NRAW. So here we have the cage for $150, the Z6 III for $3,000, then we have 3 lenses from $400 to $1,000, and we have a zoom lens for $1,800. This brings us to a total of $7,050, which is $2,750 more. You could buy a second used S5 IIX and get a Kolari OLPF filter in addition. Without the S Pro lens, it would be an investment of $1,950. If the Nikon Z6 III has an OLPF and you think of getting one for your S5 IIX, we could be at $1,250. Just for an OLPF, low rolling shutter and 6K 60p. Nikon has also options for f1.2 at 50mm and 85mm. And they just released an 35mm f1.4. The S5 IIX has better dynamic range and better recording formats than the R6 Mark II. The R6 II has 4K 60p oversampled in full frame. You can get 6K 60p in RAW with the Ninja V. I'm not sure if there is still a recording limit, but there might be some overheating issues with the R6 Mark II. So we have a cage for $150, the R6 II for $2,100, 3 lenses from $200 to $650, and a zoom lens for $1,900. This brings us to a total of $5,250. If we take out the zoom lens, we are at $3,450, which is $250 more. That's impressive and surprising, but those Canon lenses are really small, so I'm not sure if they can compete with the sharpness and fast autofocus of Lumix. You might need to buy more expensive lenses from Canon that are sharp enough and have proper autofocus. If you know more, leave a comment. There's also the Canon R8 for $1,300 that has the same sensor as the R6 Mark II, but it has recording limits and can overheat. You can mitigate this with a cooling system from SmallRig. You could get it in addition and use it as a slow-mo camera for 4K 60p full frame, but this might be tedious. If you switch to Sony, you will get the A7S III. It might not have an OLPF. The A7S III will give you 4K 60p in full frame and even 4K 120p with a small crop. The rolling shutter is around 10 milliseconds, like the Z6 III. So we have the Sony A7S III for $3,000, and then we have 3 lenses from $500 to $900, and then we have a zoom lens for $1,500. So we are at a total of $6,650, which is $2,350 more that we need to invest. And without our zoom, we are at $5,150, which is $1,850 more. For the Nikon Z6 III, the total investment for complete setup is $7,050, which is $2,750 more than for the Lumix setup. Without the zoom lens, the difference is $1,950. For the R6 Mark II, the total investment is $5,250, $1,050 more than for the Lumix setup. Without the zoom lens, $250 more. And for the A7S III, the total investment is $6,650, $2,350 more than for the Lumix setup. Without the zoom lens, the difference is $1,850. So the R6 II is the cheapest choice, but you will only have 4K and no ProRes HQ recording formats. Then an additional Canon R8 with 50mm f1.8 would cost around $1,500. Getting an additional used S5-X can cost around $1,800. If you add for $700 an old PF from Kolari, you are at $2,500 and you have a S1HX that can take your 12-hour shoot without issues and without Moret. But this is just $500 cheaper than the Z6 III, and if it turns out to have an old PF that you can take on weddings and interviews without issues, it can be a tempting choice. Only the dynamic range is not certain. Switching cameras is a difficult decision. Usability is crucial and the S5-X offers reliable performance for long shoots without overheating. Consider the benefits of a second S5-X to improve your shots and having more reliability. My general answer to switching is, wait if you can. With this internal RAW recording and this partially stacked sensor, big things can happen in 2025. Nikon just registered 2 new cameras and it's still unclear what else they will offer. You might see internal RAW recording in many other camera brands. You might see the FX3 Mark II with XOCN RAW, but there's also room for cinema cameras with internal VND. Other camera brands want to compete in the hybrid semi-professional video market too. Canon could provide better video recording formats and also 6K 60p recording to compete with the Z6 III. Especially with Canon's internal cooling, overheating will no longer be a problem. Also, the current flagship cameras could become cheaper next year. The competition will close up to the differentiating features of Lumix full-frame cameras. When these improved cameras appear in 2025, we will see how and if Panasonic reacts. To end, remember, all I did here was speculation based on some sources. If this video was helpful, leave a like and let me know your thoughts about the future of Lumix in the comments. You can find the source links in the description and in my Reddit post. See you in the next awesome video.